Speaker introductions. Welcoming back Dr. Danielle Anderson. She received her medical degree from the University of South Carolina School of Medicine in Columbia, South Carolina. She completed her family medicine residency in the University of Kentucky Rural Track, spending her last 2 years of residency at St. Clair Healthcare in Moorhead, Kentucky. She is board certified in family medicine physician. Dr. Anderson completed a fellowship in addiction medicine at the University of Kentucky and now works in the Department of Psychiatry as an addiction specialist addressing all types of substance use disorders. So welcome back, Dr. Anderson. And welcome back, Nick Kimberlian. Nick Kimberlian is a person in long-term recovery from both alcohol use disorder and substance use disorder and works as a peer support specialist in the University of Kentucky Psychiatry Department. He was formerly employed with Voices of Hope, a nonprofit recovery center in Lexington, Kentucky, and now serves as the head of the Community Advisory Board. He has been doing peer support for approximately 2 years now. He has started what is now the only in-person medication-assisted recovery anonymous meeting in Kentucky. And every day he wakes up to get to work his dream job. He works not only with patients just like himself, but also with some of the most professional, intelligent, and influential people he has ever met. So welcome, Dr. Anderson and Nick Kimberlian.
Nick and I don't have any financial disclosures. And I'll let you take a minute just to look at these practice gaps. Not going to read them off, but we're going to take a look at 12-step programs and their role in managing opioid use disorder. We're also going to look at challenges patients face when integrating their medication treatment with 12-step programs who have definitions of abstinence that don't include MOUD. Talk a little bit about the research and understand common challenges for these patients. Next slide. So our outline for today's talk, in the first part, we'll introduce the 12-step and mutual support programs, discuss development of mutual support programs and MOUD, and discuss the philosophy of traditional abstinence-based 12-step programs. In the next part, we'll discuss the term abstinence and the impacts of abstinence-based 12-step programs and discuss patient experiences with traditional 12-step programs and their response to stigma. And lastly, we'll discuss the principles of effective treatment and strategies for integrating MOUD and mutual support programs. And we'll let you take a look at the learning objectives. And we'll head on to the next slide. So Nick and I had a great time putting this presentation together, and we're really excited to be here to talk with you about this today. We hope that today's talk will be interactive, and we're interested in learning what experience your patients have when they go to mutual support programs. So we're going to start off with 2 polling questions just to see what everyone's experiences have been. We'll just give you a couple more minutes.
My apologies. For the second question, choice 2 is no. So yes,
okay.
No.
All right, no problem. So just looking at this poll, it looks like everybody thinks that patients on MOUD can also benefit from 12-step programs. And most people have had a patient or a client tell them that they were uncomfortable at a recovery meeting. So we hope to address how and why that occurs and also strategies for managing that. Next slide. Here are some frequently asked questions about 12-step and mutual support programs. We hope to address most of these during our discussion today. Are there other questions that you have right off the bat? Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat. We invite you also to let us know if you come up with additional questions during the presentation. So I think we have a broad range of questions up here, and again, feel free to let us know if other ones come up while we're going through the presentation, and we will monitor the chat for that. Next slide. So we're first going to talk about availability and access. And although MOUD is considered the standard of care, many barriers still remain preventing access to MOUD for many of our patients. NIDA estimates that only 22% of persons with OUD receive tailored treatment. Mutual support groups are much more readily accessible than MOUD. As you can see, NA has almost 34,000 meetings weekly worldwide. AA had 60,000 meetings just in the US in 2015. And we know that during the pandemic, many programs have been offering online meetings, which enable them to reach even more people. Next slide. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but today we're going to focus on the following 12-step and mutual support programs. The first part of our discussion will include information on AA, the first 12-step program, and NA, which grew out of the need to support those who use substances other than alcohol. For our purposes today, we will refer to AA and NA as traditional 12-step programs. We have included AA in this talk because many persons with opioid use disorder attend AA meetings. Later, we will talk about MARA, Medication Assisted Recovery Anonymous, SMART, Self-Management and Recovery Training, and Celebrate Recovery, and look at the similarities and differences in these programs. We recognize that patients need individual treatment plans, so we are not endorsing one program over the other, but we hope to give you an overview of these programs to help you match patients to programs that fit their needs. Next slide. Looking at the development of mutual support meetings and medications for opioid use disorder, we see that AA was founded in 1935 and NA founded in 1953, but didn't really become popular till years later. And this was decades before our first FDA-approved medications for opioid use disorder. First one was methadone in 1972. Even with the development of the partial opioid agonist buprenorphine for treatment, which was approved by the FDA for opioid use disorder in 2002, we're still lacking adequate access to treatment. Next slide. So Nick is going to talk a little bit now about abstinence-based 12-step programs.
All right. Thanks, Danielle, and thanks everybody for being here. This is an important subject, and I'm really happy to be able to talk with you about it today. So, NA became popular mainly in the 1980s during the crack cocaine epidemic in the United States. It follows the exact same rules and guidelines as AA, except, of course, for the fact that it sees alcohol and other substances in the same light.
John, could you move to the NA slide real quick and we'll go back to AA?
Oh, I am so sorry.
No, you're fine. We can do the AA slide first.
Okay, so I'm going to do the NA slide first. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Jeez. So the only concrete difference in AA and NA are the wording of the steps. The word alcohol is replaced with the word substances in NA. And at an AA meeting, people refer to themselves as alcoholic. In NA, they refer to themselves as addicts. So also in an AA meeting, members are asked to keep their comments confined to their problems with alcohol. In NA, you're free to refer to both alcohol and other drugs, usually using the word substances or DOC, which means drug or drugs of choice. Now, back to Alcoholics Anonymous. It was started by men and women who decided that in order to live a healthy, productive life, they needed to stop drinking. It was founded on the belief that with the help of a higher power and the advice and guidance from other alcoholics, somebody seeking relief from the consequences of alcoholism, they could work their simple program and live a normal, productive life, which is the goal, you know. So to begin the program, a person must first obtain a sponsor to facilitate working the steps while continuing to attend meetings. A lot of people do 90 meetings in 90 days. I've heard of people doing 180 meetings in 90 days. I myself actually did, 6 months, 1 meeting a day when I was in early recovery. So service work is also an important concept, or it's probably, it's of the utmost importance, I guess I'll say, to be involved in AA. Service work can be anything from, showing up at a meeting early to put the chairs out, or making coffee, or showing people, where the meeting's being held and what room. So once you have worked the steps in AA, the next thing is to sponsor somebody and do for them what your sponsor did for you. And the 12 traditions apply to the life of the fellowship. It's an outline that helps us to maintain, it helps them to maintain unity and provides guidance on how AA relates itself to the world and the way the fellowship lives and grows. So now, there we go. 12 steps. I won't read them all out. I know a lot of you guys on here have seen them before, at least. They were invented by the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous in Akron, Ohio in the 1930s. And they're divided out into 12 principles, a principle for each step. So the first one is acceptance. Second would be hope. Number 3 is faith. 4 is courage. 5, honesty. 6, willingness. 7 would be humility. 8 is responsibility. 9, love. 10, discipline. 11 is awareness and growth. And 12 would be service. So the first 9 steps that you just saw are the ones they consider the working steps. It'll be the steps that you work in chronological order with your sponsor. So first, you must admit you're powerless over substances, and then surrender your life over to the care of your higher power. After that, you can begin the real work. The next slide, John. So what to expect. Each meeting opens up with serenity prayer, followed by selected readings in AA and NA, the 12 steps, 12 traditions, usually a daily reflection. And in NA, you would read Who is an Addict. And the facilitator will either have prepared a topic or there'll be a step study, which is pretty obvious what that is. Or there'll be a guest speaker to give their lead or their life story, to tell you what things were like, what happened, and what they're like now. So people attending the meeting who have used or drank in the past 24 hours are asked not to share, just to listen. Halfway through, the facilitator will pass the 7th tradition basket. The 7th tradition states that NA or AA are completely self-sufficient, relying on no outside contributions. Near the end of the meeting, poker chips are given out in AA, and key tags or key rings are given out in NA. Each chip or tag states that, it stands for a different amount of clean time. So from 1 day to 11 months, you got 1 for each month. After 12 months of sobriety, participants, will get a cake, and they'll celebrate the miracle you are. There'll be, there's different types of meetings. Open meeting, everybody's, invited to attend. Then, of course, there's closed meetings where only people with substance use disorder will be sharing. And then there's young people, there's women only, men only. There's a lot of professionals in the programs, like doctors or lawyers or musicians, actors. There's a meeting, for everyone, tailored to everyone. Next slide, please. And then the key concepts in NA and AA are like singleness of purpose. You know, we're all here for a reason. The traditional 12-step language and anonymity. That's the big, right? And please, next slide.
Okay, so next we're going to discuss the term abstinence and impacts of abstinence-based 12-step programs on persons taking MOUD. We'll discuss patient experiences with 12-step programs and response to stigma. So the Merriam-Webster definition of the word abstinence is the practice of not doing or not having something that is wanted or enjoyable. For those in recovery or those working with patients in recovery, it may have different meanings. What does abstinence mean to you? Feel free to answer in the chat or unmute yourself. Because there are no wrong answers here.
Yeah, we're here to maybe try and have a conversation today, guys. So please feel free to unmute yourselves or add in the chat, whatever you want to do.
Refraining from doing something that you know is harmful for you.
Okay. That's a good definition. Yeah.
It's progress and not perfection.
Definitely.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Abstinence to me means a new way of life, opposite of what I was, where my life was prior to entering recovery.
We lost you a little bit there, Abigail, but it sounds like abstinence meant a different way of life than how you were living your life before. And
Yes, sorry, I'm traveling.
That's a great way.
no problem, no problem. And yeah, and John wrote, instead of not doing something, abstinence seems more focused, goal-oriented, maybe. These are all great definitions, and there's no wrong answer here. But our definition of abstinence can influence how we respond. Mina wrote, gaining control and maintaining. These are all great examples. John, you can go to the next slide. Or did someone else want to say something? I thought I heard someone speak up.
I was going to give now the Catholic answer for abstinence is all of those things. It's like focusing and not only refraining from things that are harmful, but refraining from, and sacrificing to stay focused. But that's my Catholic answer to that.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, appreciate it. So let's talk about perceptions on abstinence. AA and NA have ideas of abstinence that may differ from some of the definitions that we just discussed. NA released a document in 2010 which responded to questions about patients on MOUD regarding their philosophy that addiction is only treated through the 12 steps and principles. So in their document, they said, by definition, medically assisted therapy indicates that medication is being given to people to treat addiction. In NA, addiction is treated through the applications of the spiritual principles contained in the 12 steps. They go on to say NA may be compatible for addicts on medically assisted protocols if they have a desire to become clean one day, meaning come off the MOUD. NA does welcome people who are on MOUD and hopes these persons will work towards the goal of complete abstinence that we talked about above, which does not include MOUD. I would like to note here that different NA groups may feel more strongly or less strongly about this principle. Some meetings may be more friendly towards persons on MOUD. However, this definition of complete abstinence is challenging for patients on MOUD. AA literature does not specifically address MOUD, but recognizes that members have differing opinions about prescription medications. This document also states that members should not give medical advice to other members. Many patients and providers ask, why are these mutual support groups not supportive of FDA-approved medications for OUD? A simple explanation may lie in the development timeline we looked at the beginning of the talk, where we saw the advent of NA and AA were decades before we had these medically science-based treatments. AA and NA were developed as mutual support groups rooted in spirituality, while we didn't have any medical science available to help us develop treatments at that time. So that may be where the difference is, and that definition of complete abstinence came from, because that was the only option early on. Next slide. As more patients are receiving MOUD as part of their treatment plan, researchers are trying to understand the challenges that patients face in abstinence-based traditional 12-step programs, so we can figure out how to help patients navigate differing philosophies. Several studies have identified common challenges for patients on MOUD in traditional AA and NA meetings. Here are some examples noted in the literature. Buprenorphine is viewed as a crutch. Patients are told methadone and buprenorphine are trading one drug for another, discounting recovery or clean time, not allowing people on MOUD to speak at meetings or hold leadership positions. There's many of these patients on MOUD have the ability to attend meetings but not participate in the step work. Some people may refuse to sponsor persons on MOUD, and there may also be pressure to stop MOUD or taper it early. Again, it's important to remember that individual groups may have differing opinions. So this is not a blanket statement about every AA or NA group. Next slide. So now Nick is going to share some of his experiences as a peer support specialist.
Right. Yeah, guys, I've as a patient of MOUD and working in peer support over the last couple of years, I've experienced a lot of things. I mean, and you can see them, excuse me, up on the screen here. People being unable to share details of their real experience, you know. It's been said that people on MOUD are welcome to attend the meeting, but they're asked not to share because, you know, technically they've used today. But also that it's a crutch. It is nearly impossible to find a sponsor if you're honest about being on MOUD. They say that, you know, trading in one substance for another. You're putting down the heroin, but you're picking up the Suboxone, and that is going to cause you just as much problems. And then, yeah, you're not considered sober or in recovery by a large number of the membership base. And I have just a short little story about a former participant of mine. When I first got into this type of work, he showed up to our weekly meeting in a complete panic, and he was like, my sponsor found out that I was taking Suboxone, and I didn't tell him. So I guess so. Someone else in the program knew that he was taking MOUD and decided to tell his sponsor. So he told me that I swear I was going to tell him, and I believe him. But anyways, that doesn't matter. He was going to tell him, someone else got to him first. He told me that he spoke with his sponsor about it. It ended up being okay. At first he told him that he would still work with him because they've been working together for a couple of months. But then later on, the next meeting that we had, the guy was down on himself. He kept saying over and over, like, I got to get off this. I got to get off this. This isn't helping me. I got to get off this. And he said that his sponsor had been really, really, really pushing him to start to taper off because that he didn't need it and that he wasn't really sober or he couldn't properly work the program unless he did, and of course I told him that's between you and your doctor, and that's a choice and a decision that you have to make. But it turned out that by sharing that with the sponsor, it pretty much irreparably damaged their relationship. And it made the participant in turn, truly think that he was doing something wrong, and really he was just helping himself. Next slide, please.
Well, before we go to the next slide real quick, John, I think a lot of people, Nick, may have stories like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Interested to hear if anyone wants to share a story of an experience, could be positive or negative, that their patients have had with AA or NA. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's okay too.
I have like a personal experience as far as me working an AA program myself. My sponsor and his sponsors, they like frown upon working steps with someone who is on medications for opioid use disorder. And I don't think that that's the best idea, because like what Nick said, like they feel like they're doing something wrong. And like, so like my sponsor basically tells me that I can sponsor them, but I can't take them through the steps because they're still using, to him, they're still using drugs or some type of drug, and that they won't be able to see the spiritual side of it. And I don't think that that's just a stigma that comes along with AA. But yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing that, Gary. And I think that is something that we're going to talk about some more, and a little bit of ways to kind of approach that. But it definitely, for someone in recovery, the last thing we want to do is have them feel down on themselves.
Yeah. And then even for me, like, I feel like I'm like not allowed to help certain people like through their eyes, you know what I mean? And that they'll look at me different, which I don't mind sponsoring people on medications for opioid use disorder, but it was just a struggle that I had to deal with. Right. And I had to make the decision on my own.
Gary, man, thanks a lot. Thanks for being here too, man.
Yeah.
Really appreciate
I'm
it,
just
Gary.
going to say this real quick. So I personally used medication for opioid use disorder when I first entered recovery 7.5 years ago. AA is really big in my hometown. We only had one NA meeting at the time. And for me, I quickly learned that AA was going to be the fellowship that was going to be able to help me, because our particular NA meeting here definitely frowned upon the use of MOUD, and it was nothing I ever felt like I could go in and speak like at group level about. I found really quickly my support network with NAA and a sponsor who is still my sponsor 7.5 years later today, who I was always open and honest with about my medication. She had absolutely zero issues working the steps with me, as well as me sponsoring other girls. Like that was never an issue for her. I did do a taper of the medication. It was at my own pace, not at my sponsor's suggestion. It was with my my psychiatrist. And I think just the point, like, what Gary was saying too, it just depends on the group and the people. I just wish we could find a way though and now I've become much more open and verbal about this at meeting level because I've been here a little bit longer and I'm not really scared what people think about me anymore. So I have had a lot of people since then approach me in my home group that are on medication because they know that, like, I'm not going to be the person to judge you and say I can't sponsor you. But I wish we could get that on just a larger scale to some extent, because I absolutely believe I still had a spiritual awakening as far as what AA says. And like, for us to not afford that opportunity to other people, to me, would be sad just because they're taking a medication. So just my 2 cents.
Thank you so much for sharing it.
I had one more thing to share though, but my sponsor is like open to like Mara and the steps of Mara, and he's really, really interested in that. And I feel like if we could get that information out, that it will be beneficial to people like him who just, maybe he could work the steps with someone. He could feel comfortable working the steps with someone with him, like through Mara or something like that. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
Definitely, man.
Tell you, Go ahead.
I was just going to chime in that similar to Amy and what she just shared, I've spoken with people who've been successful in AA, but as they become more knowledgeable about MOUD, they become frustrated with the tenets of AA. And then I worry, could they lose that fellowship that was so beneficial to them? They were successful in their own recovery journey, but because of AA's attitudes towards medication, it could drive people away who were successful, if that makes any sense. So separate from the person on MOUD, people who have been successful with AA being turned off after many years of success because of the attitude towards others.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Brooke. Great perspective. And I think we're all demonstrating here that there are some challenges for patients on MOUD. And as Amy said, many people on MOUD have done very well in AA or NA meetings. And so, we definitely don't want to discount that, but we want to help find more ways to integrate MOUD into people's recovery without the stigma attached.
I run into something with my sponsor, back during surgeries and so forth, that really kind of has, I guess, developed more and more of our relationship, because, the literature says when in times of need, if you take your medication exactly as prescribed, you hadn't relapsed. So our conversation, little bit by little bit, has started to from his end. He's got 34 years clean, but little bit by little bit, I started to realize that, the relationship that he has with each individual sponsee is different based upon that sponsee's need. The reality of it is, I've had to have knee surgeries and so forth, taking them as prescribed, and right on top of that, talking to my sponsor, it really works. And if you're working with somebody, that's taking, medications, for opioids, then as long as you're communicating with your sponsor and you are taking them as you're prescribed by your doctor, there's more and more people starting to go that direction, because the science is there. And believe it or not, there's some people out there that are willing to look at the science, and that wasn't that way 5, 6, 7 years ago.
You hit on a great point, Tom, that many people are the evolution of this medications for opioid use disorder, that information is getting out, that is also backed by evidence. And you also mentioned that your sponsor tries to tailor individual plans based on the person's need. And that's huge. That's so important when we're treating patients with substance use disorders. So we're going to go on and talk about stigma now. Go to the next slide, John. Thank you. So 12-step programs have historically been difficult to research, mainly due to the value of anonymity. But in a recent study, Andraka Christou and her colleagues conducted interviews with patients receiving MOUD and also attending 12-step programs about their experiences and responses to those experiences. They aimed to identify what has occurred as the result of stigma, which you can see on the slide here under stigma operationalization. Many of the things that we talked about, not allowing people on MOUD to speak at meetings. So they were trying to quantify all of the things that occurred as a result of stigma. And these are many of the issues that we just discussed. Next slide. So from this study, they identified several responses to stigma. So some patients responded with anger. Just an example of someone in the study said it made him furious that MOUD was viewed as made him viewed that he was not in recovery. And it made him more furious because he used to be one of the people that said that MOUD could not be part of treatment, and he relapsed just as quick as everybody else. Other responses to stigma may be the person leaves the group, finds a new group, or starts a new group. Another response is hiding MOUD from the group or only telling the sponsor. Some people took cognitive approaches to avoiding internalization of the stigma, and we'll talk a little bit about those in the next part. And then some MOUD utilizers speak up in meetings, like Amy just spoke about, and mention the things that are positive and backed by evidence in these meetings. Next slide. So do the 12-step programs and MOUD work together? Several studies have attempted to understand traditional 12-step programs and MOUD and if they can work together. Harvey et al. And his colleagues did a secondary analysis of a randomized controlled trial, and this was comparing extended release naltrexone, which is the Vivitrol injection, versus buprenorphine for OUD. And so this was a study based on comparing these two medications, but Harvey and his colleagues took a secondary look at this and wanted to see if 12-step programs and MOUD, when used together, would improve abstinence. So they actually offered all of the participants in this program individual counseling, group counseling, 12-step programs, but they were not required, so they did not have to do any of those. And then there were weekly visits and a weekly urine drug screen, as well as a psychosocial participation log. So the patients in this study logged any psychosocial support they had, whether it's individual counseling or 12 steps or going to a group counseling. And they measured abstinence. And as we talked about, there are different definitions of abstinence, but often in research studies, we focus on abstinence. We have to have something that we can measure and quantify. And this gets defined many times as urine test results that are negative for the drug that we're looking at. So in this study, they did drug screens at 24 weeks, which was the end of the study, and then at 1 month after the study and 3 months after the study. Next slide. And this study showed that patients receiving MOUD and attending 12-step programs were more likely to have a negative urine drug screen for heroin. Also, patients receiving MOUD 12-step programs plus individual counseling, that significantly predicted abstinence at 24 weeks. Group therapy alone did not predict abstinence in this study. Like I mentioned before, many studies determined results based on negative drug screens during or after the study period. However, it's difficult to see the relationship between these studies and long-term recovery, because we know so much more goes into recovery than just quantifying this by a negative drug screen. Next slide. So can these programs work together? While we may not have great evidence that 12-step and MOUD programs work together, as Ronald et al. Points out, the common language of recovery and sense of belonging can be beneficial in combating stigma. In other words, having almost that singleness of purpose that we're all in recovery and able to talk using the language of recovery can give us a sense of community and belonging. But others who have researched this note that we need to expand the use of MOUD and not rely solely on traditional approaches. Next slide. So we're interested in hearing from you all again. What are the barriers to integrating these mutual support programs with MOUD? You can type in the chat. So Carrie mentioned, following on Brooks and other comments, what are the thoughts on the root of the resistance of some 12-step groups to welcome other paths? Is it unwillingness to consider new information, a fear of losing members? Is there a perceived threat to standing in the recovery space? Also, has this been researched to better understand this conflict relationship? So, Carrie, research on the 12-step programs, like I mentioned before, is really difficult to achieve because of the principle of anonymity, and because it can be difficult to follow patients with substance use disorders for long periods of time due to return to use or being lost to follow-up. We think some of the resistance is related to the part that I think Nick was talking about earlier, is that AA and NA have not necessarily evolved to include medications in science yet. And I think that is, I think it's very difficult. And there's also the construct of not wanting to be influenced by outside sources. So there may be a fear of losing members as well. I think that's a valid point. And I think that's an area that needs more research. You have any other comment on that, Nick?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I think it needs more research. Everything from fear of losing members to, the fear of change, I guess. And that the AA book has never been changed or edited, I'm sorry, it has been edited and updated, but it's said the same thing the whole time. And I think maybe that's a huge, I personally think that that's a huge part of the reason.
And Chris said that sometimes language is a barrier, such as the use of the term clean to mean abstinent. Since the opposite of clean is dirty, some people who use drugs find this language to be stigmatizing, and this can form basis of negative feelings about 12-step recovery and confusion about MOUD. Is there any discussion within NA about changing this? I think, Nick, you might be able to speak to that.
I do not know, but I would imagine not because it was originally what they used. I would be interested to hear from someone else about that. Definitely.
I don't think it's going to change either. I think that it would have to evolve to something new, because where they're just stuck in the ways that they've been taught, they're just not willing to change. I don't think.
I'll add on. Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
hear you.
I just want to check, make sure. I think there is anyone that has attended AA or NA meetings. I self-identify as a person with in recovery from opioid use disorder, long-term recovery, and I feel that others who've attended can agree that there is a sense of superiority within the group and of itself. There's a lot of identifying self qualities and characteristics such as like ego, but people are very quick to point out another person's flaws, yet they may have the same exact flaws, and that's why we're all there, but we're also all human. And so I say all humans in general have flaws in their characteristics. So no one is perfect, but I feel like if they were to adapt to saying, oh, we're all in recovery and we're not going to use the language of clean or dirty, or identifying as I don't use medication or I do, they fear that, like, identifying like, oh, I did it without, there's some, at least in the smaller areas of where I'm from, there definitely is stigma and within that realm. And my last thing that I'll add is, unfortunately, I still do on occasion attend in-person AA meetings where my home group is, but and where I found recovery and was in and out for several years before sustaining my recovery. I began when I started working in a treatment facility about 5 years ago. I felt horrible after recommending several clients to attend my home group, in which they came to me and told me that they had shared and had sought out a sponsor. And there's just two in particular that come to my mind because, I can't say that I'm not saying, oh, it was the group or the meeting or those people that were there, that it was their fault. But they did come back to me later on and say, Abby, I'll never go back there again. I had a very negative experience, and one person within less than a month of time, they relapsed and overdosed and they died. The second person held on a little bit longer, and it was about 4 months, but the same exact scenario. And I had guilt that I had to work through myself by like, oh, I should have done something else. I should have looked at this harder. But again, this was almost 5 years ago, and it has evolved some, but we still have a long way to go where I'm at.
Thank you for sharing that, Abby. Really,
Thanks for sharing. Zach, did you have something you'd like to share, man? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to speak on when I entered recovery. First of all, my name's Zach. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I'm a recovery coach at Voices of Hope with the Heal Initiative. But when I entered recovery, even when I was going through specialty courts, MOUD was not an option for me, and I spent the first year in veterans treatment court, in and out of jail constantly, because I couldn't get my feet underneath me, and I couldn't find a safe place to recover, and I kept returning to use. That being said, on the NA and the AA thing, I ended up finding my recovery in 12-step programs, but I think the issue is that it's an abstinence-based program, right? So, I wouldn't, and this is the best comparison I've ever heard, I wouldn't walk into a Christian church, sit down, listen to the message, and then complain that they weren't talking about Buddha. If it's an abstinence-based program, then it's an abstinence-based program. As far as medication, people in the rooms consider that an outside issue. So it's kind of that, like, don't talk about it, don't ask, don't tell type things. Because I personally know people who have worked 12 steps and have been, on medication for opioid use disorder, and they just have not disclosed any of that to anybody except for maybe their sponsor, because there is like a stigma around it. And like the Mara meeting, and even like some SMART meetings, like I would love to see more of a community for medicated assisted recovery, because that's like creating a safe place for people who, this is their path of recovery. Whereas, when you read the book, when you read the basic text or you read the big book, it's abstinence, 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 And so I think that's the best comparison I've ever heard is like, you're not going to go into a church and complain that they're, not talking about a different religion. It's an abstinence-based program, and that's how people work it. So
well, thank you for that insight, Zach, and that opinion. I think it goes to show that I think you're absolutely right, that We need to create more of a community around meetings, whatever they are, that are supportive of people on MOUD. So thank you so much for sharing. There are a couple things in the chat. Veronica mentioned sometimes the mindset that since abstinence worked for them, that it should work for everyone. And Katrina mentioned that religion could possibly play a role, and that higher power can mean different things to different people, which I definitely think is very relevant to what we're talking about. So we're going to kind of move on and talk a little bit about how to approach some of these barriers. And these, can we go to the next slide, John? So we're going to talk a little bit about the strategies for integrating MOUD and mutual support groups. And what I'm going to do here is talk a little bit about what we've seen in the literature, ways that people are managing dealing with the stigma, although there is not a great amount of that yet, and we need more of it. As we pointed out a couple times, and several of you have pointed out, but we're also going to talk about some of the other mutual support groups, and so that you can see and understand how those programs work, and maybe match people that you know in recovery to programs that may fit their needs. So we can go on to the next slide. I think it's really important, and I think it sounds like everyone here on this meeting understands that that treatment for each individual may differ. And so we're just going to review NIDA's principles of effective treatment on the need to create a treatment plan tailored to the individual's needs. So NIDA recognizes that no single treatment approach is appropriate for everyone. And you talked about this, Gary. Effective treatment attends to multiple needs of the individual. Tom, you talked about that. Medications are an important element of treatment for many patients. Behavioral therapies and counseling are the most common forms of treatment. So that's why behavioral therapies, counseling, and mutual support groups have the largest reach right now, and we need to expand access to MOUD. And treatment services and plans should be modified to meet changing needs. And I think that's something we just talked about. Like Tom said here, that 12-step organizations are too large to change. We need to refocus when we're dealing with our patients in recovery, and know that their treatment plan may change. They may require different support groups. They may require different medications. They may require different levels of care. Next slide, please. So AA and NA have been an integral part of recovery for many of our patients with MOUD, as many of you stated. And people in recovery who are attending meetings where MOUD are not supportive have used various strategies to combat the stigma. So here are some cognitive approaches that were studied in the study we discussed earlier by Andraka Christo and her colleagues through those interviews. And basically through the interviews, they went through and coded them to bring out common themes and common ways that people were avoiding taking that stigma on and internalizing it. Understanding these approaches can help us develop ways to talk to people in recovery and help them the process of dealing with stigma. Now, I'm not suggesting that every single one of these will work or they'll work for individual patients, but this first one right here, using knowledge of MOUD-based experience to decide that anti-MOUD statements are false. So some patients have decided that when they go to meetings and they hear negative things about MOUD, that they know that those are false in their head. And so that's how they keep from internalizing that stigma. We can use this strategy with our patients or our clients in recovery. So for example, if a patient comes to you and says, my sponsor told me I'm not in recovery because I receive methadone. Well, as providers and people who support them, we might ask questions or point out that the patient has had drug screens that were negative for any illicit substances for 6 months. And we can use that evidence of their recovery to demonstrate statements like you are not clean or you are not in recovery are false. Another thought process to talk to patients about is really kind of normalizing that people in any type of group will have differing opinions. So having a patient reflect that in any large group, there will be differing opinions, as well as people who are ignorant about the benefits of MOUD. So they may not know everything that you know. And this, in a sense, helps normalize there will always be people with different opinions on the choices you make in your life. The third one here, perceiving MOUD related stigma as contrary to the 12-step group tenets and thus not truly representative of what the 12 groups stand for. There are people who feel that MOUD, that stigma related to MOUD does not really fit in with the do not give medical advice to others and some of the other constructs in AA. So that's how they've mentally dealt with it. Next slide, John. Okay, more strategies for integrating MOUD may be separating buprenorphine as a medication that is obtained through legitimate and legal channels, and separating that and using substances or other drugs. So reiterating that this is a medical treatment prescribed legally and obtained legally. Another suggestion from some of these members were strengthen numbers, attending meetings with other participants on MOUD, and also identifying when possible meetings that are more accepting of MOUD, whether this be an AA meeting or NA meeting that's typically more accepting, or other mutual support programs. Next slide. So we know NA and AA are the largest and longest running programs. Here are some other ones that a lot of you are familiar with differing philosophies that can be beneficial for those in recovery. So we're going to go through each one of these programs because not everyone is as familiar with the programs, in hopes that you can use this information to take patients who don't feel comfortable in AA or NA and help them find support in a program that is helpful for them, and also kind of match future people in recovery with programs that may fit their needs. Next slide.
Yeah, guys. So now I'm going to talk about MARA, or Medication Assisted Recovery Anonymous. It's a 12-step program. Yeah, the traditions and steps were made in partnership with the National AA Board. They're on board with it. They think it's great. It's absolutely 100% non-spiritual, non-religious. We don't talk about religion or any type of spirituality in the meetings. Sponsorship is optional, although it does encourage you, to take advice from responsible others, and to share in the group and share with everyone. Yeah, the principles are built on living a safer and healthier lifestyle. And MARA, no traditional AA language, and everybody can share. It doesn't matter if you've used today or not. And MARA was founded within the last decade by a man named Jeff Kamen. Jeff is a certified drug and alcohol counselor in Texas, but he's originally from New York City, Bronx. And over the years, he noticed that traditional 12-step meetings, were not so open to people that were using medication in the recovery. So with the help from people all over the country, all over the world, really, he began to host meetings on Zoom and, in his practice in person. Then, it kind of built up and up and up to a humongous Zoom presence, online meeting presence now. So, and yeah, like I said, it's based on living a safer lifestyle and taking care of your own self, of your own life, rather than handing everything over to your higher power and admitting powerlessness. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the MARA 12 steps, I'm not going to read, each and every single one of them. I'm going to leave them up here just for a second so you can, get a little bit of a better feeling about what exactly they are. They're very similar, almost exactly similar to AA, only, just a few, language differences. And yeah, you can work those with a friend with a sponsor or with, by yourself. And then when you feel like you need advice or guidance, you share that with what it says is responsible others, your peers in the group or a close friend. I think we can go ahead to the next slide. And so the meeting, it'll open up with a moment of silence. And I always say, so that we can remember those, who are not with us tonight and those who are no longer with us. Followed by a volunteer reading the MARA preamble. Then the facilitator goes over a few things, such as why we're here, who is welcome, and why exactly that we absolutely 100% never under any circumstance give medical advice or direction to anyone. So yeah, then they're going to pass, the facilitator will pass the MARA desire chip out. So what that says on the chip is MARA on one side and a desire to live a safe lifestyle today on the other side. So all you have to have is a desire. They don't give chips for certain lengths of time. So yeah, after that, somebody reads the 12 steps and the facilitator will then, say what kind of meeting we're going to have today, be it a discussion, a step study, or a speaker meeting. And then he or she will reveal the topic. MARA is open to everyone and everybody's welcome to share, no matter if they've used today or not. And it was made especially for people on medication, but it was not made only for people on medication. Everyone, like I said, is welcome. And I personally know several people who do use the MARA program and don't take any sort of medication in their recovery. Yes, next slide, please. So next up, we got self-management and recovery training, or SMART recovery. Excuse me. All right, so SMART is a 4-point program for recovery. So those 4 points are building and maintaining motivation, coping with urges, managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and living a balanced life. Now, it was founded in 1994 by Joe Gerstein. It boasts itself as a science and fact-based program, ever evolving as science advances. It's described as a program of self-empowerment, and participants play an active role in their own recovery. So it's strictly non-religious, and it's a program where the disease concept or the concept of a higher power is left absolutely and totally up to the individual. It's not part of the program, and it's never, ever discussed. SMART mentions both psychiatric and addiction medicine. They're considered an important part of recovery, a very important part of recovery for some. SMART meetings rely on the participation of everybody involved through, collaborative discussions of each exercise. And they also boast a large online community with chat rooms. And they also have it is Smart Recovery online. And they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Zoom meetings all over the world every day. We can go to the next slide and then directly go to the next slide. That's just the 4 points as they put it in the book there. And I've already read those, so we can go on ahead. So yeah, this is the PIG, the problem with instant gratification, right? The PIG, this means, once we use, we feel normal, but only for a little while. The relief or pleasure reinforces the pattern and strengthens the habit. So long as you're acting out, you're strengthening your addiction or your negative behavior. Dr. Gerstein uses a phrase that he invented called masturbation to describe someone with an addiction or problem behavior. Masturbation means being a person who lives by a set of unrealistic and absolute demands that they place on themselves, others, and the world. But by using the SMART tools provided in the book, such as the hierarchy of values, which is, chapter 3, it's the first exercise that you do, and it's something that you refer back to constantly, pretty much, almost in every exercise. And then you have like your change plan worksheet, your cost benefit analysis, and by using the SMART goal setting, which is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. SMART also encourages things like meditation and exercise, not just doing it once and giving up, but instead practicing and actually trying and getting out of your comfort zone. Basically, at first is what they instruct you to do or what they want you to do. Facilitators can try out guided meditations during the meeting, or post a link to channels where participants can log on and listen to the guided meditations themselves later on. All of these exercises, examples, and instruction are to help participants be able to begin the process of changing their lives by learning how to live a more balanced, healthy life. So eventually, though, with SMART, unlike the other programs, you can graduate if you want to. It's totally optional. So the tools and exercise provided are meant to help you make permanent lifestyle changes. So, by your graduation, if you decide to graduate, the SMART organization states, that you'll be able to apply the SMART tools and practices without even thinking about it. And that would be the ultimate success in SMART recovery. And we can go on to the next slide. So yeah, SMART, you can see it's a pretty simple layout. Each meeting starts off with the opening statement of SMART, and then usually the facilitator will go around the room and do a check-in, which consists of basically, what did you do last week? How's it going? What's going on in your world? Including struggles, Next, the facilitator will introduce and discuss an exercise from the book, followed by about 10 or 12 minutes to independently work on the exercise. I always encourage conversation, talk with each other, share your examples. And while they're working, usually the facilitator will put up an example of, what's on the worksheet up on the board to then go over, with everyone. And then after that, you'll go around the circle, or in order, popcorn style, they call it, giving each participant the chance to share what they put. And although participation is strongly recommended, it's not required. So nearing the middle of the meeting, the facilitator will remind everyone that Smart Recovery is a nonprofit run completely on donations and government grants. The hat will now be passed for donations. They are used at the facilitator's discretion to help people pay for books, pay rent, or even to help out a participant in trouble. At the end of the meeting, again, the facilitator will go around the room for a checkout. During the checkout, usually participants will state one thing they're grateful for and a positive affirmation, about themselves, something nice or something great about themselves that they feel that they want to share. So after that, SMART completely relies on volunteers and encourages participants to become facilitators also. So that's along with, kind of with showing up early or making coffee or whatever. It's kind of their version of service work. because not everybody can just say, okay, I want to start facilitating SMART today, or like, I need you to facilitate or lead the meeting or chair the meeting next Tuesday because I can't be here. You can't do that. You have to take the Get Smart Fast facilitator training online. It's a small fee, but SMART encourages facilitators to mentor other people that wish to become facilitators as well. We can go ahead to the next slide, please. Yeah, and Danielle's going to tell us about Celebrate Recovery.
So yeah, the last mutual support group we're going to talk about is Celebrate Recovery. It was founded in 1991 by John Baker in Lake Forest, California, and has recently expanded to an international presence. I believe in 2004, they were, the state of California allowed Celebrate Recovery to be used in the state prisons and was approved as a recovery program in the state prisons there. It's based on the 12 Christ-centered steps and 8 principles. In this main difference here, Jesus Christ is the only higher power, whereas in AA or NA, higher power is left up to the individual. So in the Celebrate Recovery, Jesus Christ is the only higher power. And they talk about a cycle of hurts that cause hangups and habits. And the goal of Celebrate Recovery is to help people find freedom from the hurts, hangups, and habits that they have. This is not limited to substance use. Celebrate Recovery helps patients struggling with codependency, behavioral addictions, anger, and food. And those are just some of examples of what they can help with. They have large group meetings and small group meetings, often at churches. You can get an accountability partner. They do value anonymity, and there's no real graduation from Celebrate Recovery. You can continue to come as long as you want, or you can be there for a season to help with whatever you're trying to overcome. And the next slide. So these principles, the Celebrate Recovery principles, as you can see, recovery spelled down here very cleverly, are based on the Christian Beatitudes and are paired with the 12 Christ-centered steps. So we'll just go over a couple of the constructs. One is the notion that I am powerless over my tendency to do the wrong thing. The next one is earnestly believing that God exists. The next one, and that goes with step 2. The third one is commit all my life and will to Christ's care and control is step 3. Step 4 and 5 of the Christ-centered steps involve openly examine and confess my faults to God, myself, and someone I trust. 6 and 7 are voluntarily submit to any and all changes God wants to make in my life. 8 and 9 are offering forgiveness to those who have hurt me and make amends for the harm I've done. Step 10 and 11 involve reserving a daily time with God for self-examination. And step 12 talks about service, yielding myself to God and be used to bring this good news to others. Next slide. So what to expect at a meeting. So for Celebrate Recovery meetings, there's a general meeting night. It may begin with a meal to start the fellowship. That depends on the group. So some groups do that, some groups don't. The large group meeting then consists of a period of time of worship, which oftentimes includes singing songs. And next, there is a testimony from someone who is in the program or a lesson connected to the 12 Christ-centered steps. Following that, there are open share groups, which are gender and recovery issue specific. And in order to ensure the safety of each group, There are open share guidelines. Some of those guidelines are keeping sharing focused on your own thoughts and feelings. No crosstalk, so no individual conversations. Noting that everyone in the meeting is there to support each other and not fix each other. And then there's anonymity and confidentiality. Step study groups usually happen on another night and delve deeper into the steps. They're also gender-based, but those groups are mixed recovery issues. So people can learn about how others from Celebrate Recovery are managing their personal recovery. Next slide. So this is not an exhaustive comparison, but I wanted you all to be able to take a look at this and hopefully in the future use it to help match patients to what groups might be helpful for them. So AA and NA, what we have up here are the 12 steps and traditions. They both involve spirituality. These are abstinence-based programs. Sponsorship is required for step work, and they value service. For MARA, they also have 12 steps and 12 traditions. MOUD is accepted. The sponsor is optional, and it's not a spiritually based program. The SMART Recovery program is the 4-point recovery system based on science and cognitive approaches. It welcomes MOUD, not spiritually based, and Celebrate Recovery is the 12 Christ-centered steps and 8 traditions. Next slide. So we're going to come back to these now, and we're running low on time, but we only have a couple slides left. So we're just going to briefly go over some of the answers to this that we hope you got from our presentation. So am I required to speak at AA and NA meetings? So the answer to that is no. And Nick, jump in for anything here. 2, do I have to be a Christian to go to AA and NA meetings? So the answer to that is no. You can, whatever higher power that you believe in can be part of your recovery. What meetings are friendly to people prescribed MOUD? So we know that MARA and SMART are. In terms of Celebrate Recovery, they don't make a statement on MOUD. However, we do have some patients in our clinic that go, and they do not specifically say that they've ever been told not to be on MOUD or stigmatized for that. I'm not sure if anyone else has had a different experience. The next is, do I have to tell my sponsor that I'm on MOUD? And I'll let Nick take that one.
Oh yeah, that's your choice and your choice alone, and no one can ever make that for you. But they say that AA and NA are programs of brutal, 100% constant honesty in every turn of your life. They say that we have spent the majority of our life telling untruths, being liars and backstabbers. And so, again, it's completely up to the individual, but the program has rigorous honesty. So I personally, I would, if that's the direction that you want to take that.
So there's no real right answer to that. Like Nick said, it's an individual decision.
I think I just gave different answers. So.
No, well, I think each person has to take what you mentioned into account and make their own decision.
Absolutely.
I'm not spiritual. Are there any recovery programs that would work for me? SMART and MARA would work for this patient. One of the most difficult questions we get is, what should I do if my sponsor tells me I need to stop taking Suboxone? This is a difficult question. As Nick said in his story, he generally tells people to speak with their physician about this. And my approach to this, I generally try to point out to the patient that my philosophy on taking MOUD or receiving MOUD is that it is a medication for a chronic illness, just like for hypertension or diabetes or or even a cancer medication. And so I don't view it as any of the things we talked about before, trading one drug for another. It's a medication that helps you live your life and a medication that can protect you. It's a medication that may help you survive. The other thing that I usually talk about is that every person's treatment for any medical illness is individual. So no one without medical knowledge should be giving them advice on whether they should take Suboxone or not. It's got to be an individual decision for that person. It's hard. That doesn't take away the stigma, but we have to address it somehow. And I'm hoping that we have a better way to address it in the future. The last question is, do I have a sponsor? Do I have to have a sponsor to work the steps? So you do not, or you do in AA and NA, but they do not have to in MARA. Is that correct, Nick?
That's correct. Yeah. You know, like I said, you can choose to work some of the steps yourself, you know, but other steps require that you discuss with other people. In MARA, it's referred to as responsible others, meaning just your friends in the program, your peers, maybe a certain peer that is that you're closer with. But yeah. So other than that, everyone, sponsorship is required to work in program.
Next slide, John. So few considerations for your practice. Ask patients about their experiences in 12-step programs. Let them know that you care about their experience. Offer support and help navigate negative or incorrect information about MOUD. And also be knowledgeable about programs that are accepting MOUD in your area. Next slide. So our quick summary is that patients on MOUD often face challenges surrounding abstinence-based traditional 12-step programs. Environments that stigmatize MOUD may cause the patients to feel anger, pressure to taper off MOUD, or search for an alternative. More accepting groups. MARA and Smart Recovery are two programs that are accepting towards patients on MOUD. Providers can help patients on MOUD navigate these challenges by offering support, helping to navigate negative feelings, and being knowledgeable about alternatives in their area.